All right, everybody, let's go ahead and begin. I'm glad that you're all with us here. Last time you had the 1.99 Unit 1 review worksheet. So let's go through this and talk through this together. All right. So this hits on the two standards that we've looked at so far over the past week or so. We're looking primarily at making quality decisions through setting SMART goals, developing positive financial habits, differentiating needs from wants, and so on. And then the second standard was looking at career choices and educational choices and how those can impact career lifetime earnings and overall standard of living, quality of life, work-life balance, all those things. All right. So we'll go through two things. We'll go through this first worksheet, looking at the answers. These are all questions that are level 1, level 2 type questions. None of them are super deep or in depth. They're not asking you to apply your knowledge to unique scenarios. These are all just making sure you understand the basics, being able to define key terms or, categorize, maybe smart elements, things like that. But none of it is really applying your knowledge or making inferences of, based on what you know to unique scenarios or anything like that. So these are all level 1, level 2 type questions or depth of knowledge that we're looking. All right. So number 1 says, what are habits and why is developing a good habit for how you handle money important? So habits are simply things that we're accustomed to doing. They're things that we become used to doing. All right. And having good monetary habits is just the first step that's needed if you plan to win with money. If you're going to be successful with money, okay, you have to have good financial habits. All right. Number 2, what's the difference between a need and a want? Needs are things that are required, essential for your well-being, things like food and shelter and medicine and clothing. All right. Whereas wants are essentially anything else. Wants, are things that are desired. They add enjoyment, satisfaction. They bring us pleasure, but we can do without them if we need to. Okay, so things like that would be, eating out at a restaurant, designer clothing. Maybe it's, attending that sporting event or a concert or whatever it is, right? Basically, anything else that's not a need, but is still desirable would be considered a want. All right, number 3, wants and needs are not the same for everybody, so they're not universal. They're not the same for everybody because needs and wants are based primarily on an individual's circumstances and an individual's values. All right, those two things can dictate essentially what we need to continue to survive or what we need for our well-being. And because nobody's values, nobody's circumstances are identically similar to others. All right. No two people's wants and needs are going to be identical to each other. All right. Number 4, what's meant by the term instant gratification? So that's the desire to experience pleasure or enjoyment immediately without delay, right? So we see something, we want it right now. We wish to eat something, we want to eat it right now, right? So it's just instant, meaning at this moment. Gratification just means satisfaction. So achieving or feeling some satisfaction or some pleasure in the moment without delay. All right, which leads us to number 5, what is meant by delayed gratification. So that's being able to put off something that we want until later. All right, so being able to delay or put off that satisfaction or that pleasure or that enjoyment of something until a later time. All right. Number 6, the acronym used for effective goals and what does each mean? So that is the acronym SMART, in which each letter within the word SMART stands for something, right? So the S in SMART is specific, meaning what exactly and definitely do we wish to accomplish? All right. M is measurable, meaning how much is needed to feel like we achieved it, right? So if it's a monetary goal, how much money do we need? If it's a personal goal, how much do we need to be able to do, or how much do we need to obtain to consider that goal met? All right. A in SMART is achievable, meaning what are the step-by-step actionable steps we can take to reach that goal. R is relevant in terms of why do we want to accomplish this particular goal. And T is timely, which simply puts a definite timeline or deadline by which we wish to achieve that goal. All right. Number 7, what is the time frame for a short-term goal? 8 is a long-term goal. Now, there's no hard and fast rule about what a short-term goal is and what a long-term goal is. All right. Some families might say a short-term goal is anything that we can accomplish in the next 6 months, or maybe it's even anything that we can accomplish within the next year. A long-term goal, some people would think it takes us more than a year to achieve. Some would say more than 5 years. Some would say more than 10 years, right? If we were looking at businesses, oftentimes a short-term business goal would be anything within a year. Okay, a long-term goal might be 5 years or more. All right, and so there's no hard and fast rule for what a short-term goal is or what a long-term goal is. For us, for our purposes, when we're practicing writing our goals or on the assessment, when we're asked to categorize goals, we're going to essentially use 1/4 of a year, right? So our school year is broken up into quarters. We're going to do the same. We're going to say a short-term goal is anything that can be accomplished within 3 months. All right. So essentially 1/4 of a year. Okay, so if I can get it done before the end of this academic quarter, okay, that would be a short-term goal. If it takes me a semester, maybe that's an intermediate goal, right? If it takes me up to a year, that's still going to be a medium or an intermediate goal. For us, we're going to consider a long-term goal anything that takes more than a year to accomplish. All right. Number 9, what's a spending log and why is that important? So a spending log is simply a record of all of the transactions in which you spend money. Okay. And so why is that important? It helps to identify monetary habits that we have that we may or may not be aware of. It is useful in creating budgets. If we have a record of how we've spent money in the past, we can use that as a basis for creating a plan for how we're going to spend money in the future, right? It's also useful in helping to identify certain monetary goals or future goals. Having an idea of how much we spend and where we're spending that money can help us create goals in terms of identifying places where we can cut back or identifying places where we might need to focus a little bit more, like savings or putting money away for investments, things like that. All right. So again, it's just simply a record of your spending and is useful for a variety of things, creating budgets, reflecting on your spending habits, things like that. All right. Number 10, speaking of one of those uses, what is a budget? A budget is simply a plan for how we will spend our earned money. All right. A budget is created before we've earned that money, before we've received that income, and it's just a detailed plan of how we plan to use that money. All right. We'll talk a lot more about budgets in a later unit. But right now, just when we're talking about habits and making good decisions, we can at least discuss a budget on a kind of a foundational level of understanding what that is. But we'll go into budgets much, much more in depth in a later unit. Number 11, difference between a fixed cost and a variable cost. So a fixed cost is simply a cost that remains the same each month. Okay, so we don't have any flexibility or any ways to deviate from that cost. So things like your mortgage, right, paying for your home each month, your rent, student loan payments. Okay, all of those are going to be fixed costs. Property taxes would be fixed cost. Interest on a loan would be a fixed cost. All right. Variable costs, vary mean being able to change. Okay. Those are costs that can change from month to month. Those we have a lot of control over when we're looking at how to spend money. All right. So how much money we spend on food, on clothing, on entertainment, on gasoline, how much we spend on other kind of, sometimes they can be wants, occasionally they can be needs, but it's just anything that we have more control over and we can adjust that spending from month to month. All right. Number 12, what does PYF stand for? That stands for pay yourself first. That's the idea of when you are deciding how to spend your money, that you should always set aside money for savings first before spending anything else or before paying any other bills. Essentially, you're paying your future self as if that were another expense. All right. So it just ensures that we are putting money away for savings for that emergency safety net, or putting it away for future use, okay, before we spend any other money. Because the flip side of that, or the other option, would be to spend money on everything that we want and need during the month, and then anything that's left over gets put into savings. All right, if we take that approach, oftentimes we're going to not have as much money left over as we wish to put into savings. Maybe we might not even have money at all. All right, so by putting money towards savings, you are prioritizing that before anything else to ensure that your future self is being taken care of. All right, number 13, what is a resume? A resume is simply a one, occasionally two-page document that summarizes your experience, your work experience, your education experience, and so on, your abilities, accomplishments. It is essentially a one-page summary of all of your past experiences that you would use to put yourself out there when you are applying for a job. All right, so it's kind of like a one-page sell, marketing tactic to sell that future employer on you, and why they should continue to follow up, and why they should consider you for the job. All right, a resume is not going to get you a job. A resume's goal is to keep you in the standing for a job, and ultimately to get a job interview. All right, and that's it. So it's got to highlight your experiences, it's got to highlight your accomplishments, to convince that employer about why you may be a good fit for a certain job opening. All right, number 14, three types of people that would make for good references on a job application. So good references would be anybody who could emphasize your strengths, emphasize any accomplishments, but somebody who isn't necessarily biased toward you because they are your friend or a family member, right? So teachers, coaches, former employers, former supervisors, neighbors, if you've ever taken care of a pet of theirs when they're out of town, or done yard work for them, a school counselor, any adult who could speak highly of you, but isn't biased because they are, your parent, because they are your aunt or uncle, right? Those types of people wouldn't be very good references. All right. Putting down, a classmate, not a good reference, because they don't typically have the kind of life experience to be able to really speak to your strengths. All right. So typically adults, somebody who's not related to you, but who could still speak highly of you and your character, your accomplishments, your work ethic, and things like that. All right, number 15, list at least 3 advice tips for a successful job interview. I mean, we could spend the next half hour talking about tips, but ask for 3. So, what I would typically say is research the company beforehand, so that you have an idea of what kind of work they do, or what kind of work you may be expected to do. All right, come prepared with questions to ask, so that you can demonstrate that you did look into the company, and maybe things that weren't necessarily highlighted on a website, or weren't mentioned in a job opening advertisement. All right, dress appropriately, arrive early, typically about 15 minutes early. Okay, so those would all be the types of really basic tips that I would give. I might also say, after the interview, all right, write a thank you note within a day. Okay, handwritten notes are always a little bit more powerful and impactful than a typed note or an email. All right, so um, you know, come with knowledge of the company, come prepared with questions, but also follow up with a thank you note, which leads to 16. Why is writing a thank you note a good idea after a job interview? It simply helps you stand out from other applicants. It leaves a positive impression in the interviewer's mind of you when it comes to making decisions, whether that is to call certain applicants back for a second interview, or to offer a job, right? Little things like that that can set you apart from others, can make big differences. All right. 17, what's the difference between a public college, university, or a private one? So public college, public university are typically funded by state governments. All right. So the state government provides the majority of their operating income. So that typically means lower tuition, lower costs for the student. All right. Whereas a private college or a private university still may receive some public funding, but the majority of their funding comes from student tuition. And so that means that typically the student tuition costs will be higher. All right. And I mean, there are other differences as well, but that is one primary difference between the two is just a public college receives public funding. A private college is simply is majority funded through private funds of their students. Number 18, generally, as a person's educational level increases, what happens to their expected level of earnings? We've looked at how increasing your education, whether that be advancing from a high school degree to a 2-year associate's degree from a community college or a 4-year bachelor's degree from a college or university, upwards into master's degrees, advanced degrees, doctorates, and so on. We've seen historically that in general, as your education level increases, your earnings will increase as well. All right. And we saw early on, number 19, in general, on average, how much more can you expect in terms of lifetime earnings if you have a 4-year college degree versus a high school degree? It is, by various measures, $1 million or more. Generally, we would expect your lifetime earnings to increase somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million over your lifetime. All right, so it's not an insignificant amount of money that you can expect to increase. All right. Now, again, that's not true of every job. It's not true of every degree. It's not true of every high school graduate and college graduate, but on average, that's what we see. There are always exceptions to averages, but that is at least what the data supports for the most part. All right. So that was the review that you were to complete today. All right. I'm also going to have you do one more review. As I mentioned before, looking at this, these are all primarily level 1, level 2 types questions, or kind of surface level depth of knowledge or understanding. They're all just being able to recite terms or definitions. But there's not a lot of application or exploration of that material. All right. And so the next review that we're going to do in class, or that you're going to do today, is a little bit more in depth. From the 1.99 unit review folder, all right, that first link is what you were to already complete. All right, this next one is our in-class review. Between those is the answer key to the review worksheet that we just discussed. So if you need to go back and review any of those answers, or you'd like to kind of check again, if you need to go back and check on those answers, all right, feel free to do so. That link is published. All right, but then you'll notice an in-class review link. All right, go ahead and click on that, make a copy as always. As I said, these are a little bit more detailed, more deep questions that need to apply not just your understanding. You need to demonstrate not just that you know what the acronym SMART stands for, but can also apply that acronym, all right, for example. So what I would like you to do is go through this worksheet. All right. It's broken up. The first page is covering 1.1 standard material. The second page is 1.2. So we start off with Austin's goal. All right. We have separated the SMART components into 5 statements. They're not in order. It's not that it's in SMART. You simply need to go through and you need to identify which characteristic of SMART does each individual statement connect to. All right. So it says Austin will spend 25 less on entertainment and save it instead. Austin will save money for college. He'll save money for 2 years. He'll save $600. He's determined the opportunity cost of saving is more valuable to him than spending. Okay. So categorize each of those into the characteristic of SMART. Simply need to put an SMAR or T in the blank next to it, and then take those 5 individual components, put them together into a 1 or 2 sentence SMART goal. All right, then we get into missing components. All right, so the following 3 or 4 examples are all incomplete goals when it comes to being SMART. So you need to read through each statement, identify what is missing, what's keeping it from being SMART. All right, and then how do you know that that is the element that's missing? All right. So if it's not specific, if it's missing the measurable, right, whatever it is, identify what's missing and then talk through how you know that that's missing, right? Or what you're not seeing that would indicate that would otherwise be there if it were a SMART goal. All right. Makes sense? Then on the second page, we've got, again, just some more basic questions, a little bit more on um, understanding education choices, career choices, and so on. So there's a few multiple choice questions, but then you are asked to analyze 4 possible career options: becoming a licensed plumber, attending a 2-year community college for an associate's degree in business, a 4-year college degree, bachelor's degree in computer coding, or a 4-year college degree in political science, and then continuing on to attend law school. All right, so you're going to kind of compare and contrast, analyze those choices. All right, as it says, in on multiple factors, think through education cost, future earning potential, job security, work-life balance, job satisfaction, and so on. All right, now you don't need to make a choice. Okay, I'm not looking for you to actually choose which one is best. All right, I simply want you to weigh the pros and cons of each of those options. All right. So what I'm gonna provide some time for you to work through this. Okay. So on your own, go through this worksheet. Again, it's from the 1.99 unit review folder on Schoology. Work through this. All right, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about it.